keep yourself muted with your video off the entire time. We will have time for Q&A after Steve's presentation, and we are excited to have Graham Zimmerman, the expedition's leader and a good personal friend of Steve's, here to facilitate. You can submit a question for answering using the chat box. For the sake of time and ease, we will not use the raise hand function for questions. Our team will be monitoring the chat box only, and Graham will pose your questions directly to Steve and answer a few himself. Lastly, I want to share that your ticket purchase tonight directly supports Mountaineers Books, who utilize donor support to produce titles that help protect millions of acres of threatened habitat and inspire countless adventures across the globe. This cause is near and dear to Steve, who is not only one of our authors, but he has chosen to donate 100% of the proceeds of his book back to the Mountaineers. If this inspires you, we encourage you to consider making a small donation using a link that we'll share with you soon. That's it for the formalities. I now have the privilege of introducing someone I have the honor of calling a friend and a mentor, Steve Swenson. When I first met Steve, he was shoveling gravel at Fun Rocks, a crag in Mazama, as part of a stewardship project hosted by the AAC. He had volunteered to work with our teenagers in our Mountaineers Adventure Club the following day, and as our teens had been rained off a climb that day, we all grabbed shovels and helped out. One of our more precocious kids started chatting with Steve, and he seized the opportunity to talk to her about how young people in the Mountaineers can be contributing to the broader climbing community. Since that first interaction nearly a decade ago, I have never seen him miss an opportunity to use his experience and his connections for the betterment of others. Before I knew it, Steve was sitting down with me and Tom, our CEO, to talk about ways the Mountaineers can stay on the forefront of climbing education. He gave a presentation at our leadership conference about the growth of gym climbing and the important role the Mountaineers can play to meet the growing variety of needs for climbers. He soon joined our board of directors, and his personal investment in the Mountaineers has been humbling and hugely impactful. He has worked tirelessly with our development team as a Peak Society donor himself, as well as co-chairing the past 3 galas. He's played an active role in our board governance, helping us rethink our board structure so that it's most effective, and helping to recruit incredible talent to our board. And he's continued to play a direct role in taking our climbing programs to the next level. He provided vision and leadership for what is now our Alpine Ambassadors program, a program designed to invest in our top volunteers so that they can become better climbers and teach others in the Mountaineers to climb more skillfully. In just 2 years, that program has led to new courses, new curriculum, and a new kind of stoke in our community. Through this program, he's also become a climbing mentor for many of our leaders and instructors. If you've had a chance to read Steve's book, Karakoram, you've already gotten to know him a little. Tonight, you'll hear not just an extraordinary story of alpinism, but also a story of teamwork, friendship, and a commitment to the long game. At the Mountaineers, it's those same values he brings that make him such an incredible leader. He's a mentor to so many of us, and he pushes us hard to think creatively and to make bold decisions. And at the same time, he listens deeply, values friendship, and knows that patience and tenacity will get you where you want to go. With that, I hope you enjoy this presentation, and Steve, I give the floor to you.
Thank you, Becca, for your kind words. With that, I think we'll, let me share my screen here, and we can start talking about Link Sar. Here we go. And I'm going to put it in presentation mode. There we go. Wonderful. Link Sar was a almost 20-year-long project for me. Just to give you some background, Link Sar is part of the Karakoram range, which sits in the province of Kashmir, which is the northern parts of both Pakistan and India. And the province of Kashmir is a disputed territory, and which has been divided between Pakistan, India, and China, as this map shows. Big mountains like K2 that you've heard of, but even more so, Link Sar is close to the actual ground position line where soldiers are faced off in Kashmir between India and Pakistan. And as a result, the mountain was closed the climbers, for many years. I first heard about Link Sar in 2000. I'd gone to a slideshow that Jimmy Chin was giving about a big wall climb that they had done in the Condus Valley, an area that had been closed ever since the mid 80s. I started asking him about what he saw in the area, and he gave me this picture of Link Sar. And so I applied and for permission for this unclimbed 7,000 meter peak, which we were granted for the following year, which is quite unusual because that whole valley had been closed ever since the mid 80s, and it opened for a couple of years in 2000 and 2001. And we were fortunate enough to be able to go there. Whoops, I'm sorry, that was a little sensitive. We were able to go there, that year. To give you a little bit of orientation, this is a map of the Karakoram, and you can see up here in the top, where K2 is, where Skardu, you fly into Skardu from Islamabad. It's kind of the launch point for a lot of the mountains in the area. And in this area in the box that we're gonna, let me get rid of that, that I showed there. It's a Google Earth picture. You can see Link Sar up here on the left, and our base camp that we could drive to down there on the right. And in 2001, we went in and did a reconnaissance of this whole kind of southeast and north side of Link Sar. And that's what we were primarily able to accomplish in 2001. This is a picture of the mountain. It's the valley, the Condus Valley, is one of the deepest valleys in the Karakoram. The base camp that we could drive to, because the Pakistanis had built a road along the Kaveri Glacier to supply their troops up at the actual ground position line with India. And what we thought we should go look at initially was this gully up here, kind of to the left of the summit, hidden in the shadows. And but when we got up there, we saw that it was just full of all these towering seracs that could break off and send tons of ice down on top of any, climbers below. So that wasn't a safe way to go. We ended up doing some reconnaissance, some other approaches to the mountain that convinced me the southeast side of the peak was the way to try to climb Link Sar. But the following year, it closed and we couldn't get back in again. After that 2001 expedition, I went back to the village of Hushay to visit my friend Rasul here on the right, who has been with me on every Karakoram expedition I've been on in Pakistan since 1987, with a picture of Rasul there, who had been with us on that trip in 2001 with his father. And then on my right was his son, Fida Ali, who was only about 7 or 8 years old at this time. And he'll play into the story here a little bit more later. Link Sar, because it was closed from the Condus side now for many years, after 2001, some British expeditions came in here from the Charkusa Valley from the other side and went up this glacier here and up this face, and to try to climb along that ridge to Link Sar from that side. But they never succeeded in getting further than this far western summit here that they called Link Sar West. I had been climbing in India in 2009 and 2011. In 2015, I wanted to go back to Pakistan. And, and by then, really it was an opportunity for me to really climb with a new generation of young climbers. Most of my partners from earlier trips had either quit climbing or, weren't doing it anymore. And so I went in 2015 with Graham Zimmerman and Scott Bennett to try to climb the south face of K6 Central, which was unclimbed at the time. From the photos that we had, there was this buttress that came down from the summit that we thought extended all the way to the bottom. But when we got there below the face, after climbing over a high pass, we could see that it only came about 2/3 the way down, and the lower third was, there was no protection from avalanches coming off the big ice cliffs on either side of the buttress. And we saw this big avalanche from a serac that had collapsed on the right side of the buttress that completely engulfed the lower face of the mountain. And so we decided that that was too dangerous of a route and abandoned that. But we picked a different objective, that large granite spire in the background called Changi Tower. That was a 6,500 meter Trango Tower-like unclimbed granite spire, which Scott, Graham, and I climbed in 2015 along that right-hand skyline. The reason why this is important to our story about Link Sar was because the other side of Changi Tower faced into the Condas Valley and looked directly across at Link Sar. And so being there in 2015 rekindled my interest in Link Sar again from 2001. And also I could see from the photos again that I was convinced that the right-hand skyline in the photo was the route that we want to follow to try to get to the summit. In 2017, we applied for a permit, and again with Graham and I, and we added Chris Wright to our team for 3 of us. And we flew into Skardu. Again, you know, there's all the government bureaucracy with permits. Our liaison officer there, who's to Major Zafar, to Graham's right, accompanied us on the trip. And it was an opportunity for me to get together with my old friends, Rasul, who came with us again, and then Fida Hussein sitting in the middle, who had been on trips with me to the north side of K2 and Nanga Parbat in the past. We took the Jeep into the Condas Valley, and that prominent tower just up and to the right of the Jeep is the wall that Jimmy Chin and his partners had climbed in 2001 that got me interested in Link Sar in the first place. But the road going up to the base camp that is maintained for the Army to supply their troops is constantly being washed out. So we had to wait for them to repair the road, but eventually got up to the same base camp that we used in 2001 on our 2017 attempt. Again, we had Rasul and his son-in-law Nadim at base camp, you know, cooking and taking care of us there, while Chris and Graham and I went out to find a route across the Kaveri Glacier and up onto the meadows, up to an advanced base camp where I'd been in 2001, following basically the same route. It's an incredibly beautiful meadows up there, up to about 4,600 meters, where we put our advanced base camp. But in 2017, it was just, you know, a small camp with a couple of small bivy tents that we supplied ourselves, which, as I will talk about in a minute, led to some problems. The problem was that really at a camp like this, you don't eat that well. You know, we're carrying lightweight food up there and living off of ramen noodles and freeze-dried dinners for long periods of time really isn't that satisfying. It's hard to maintain morale, and you're eating all kinds of other yucky things that would make us run back down to base camp anytime that the weather was bad. But what we did accomplish in 2017 was really spend a lot of time on the lower reaches of the mountain, really trying to get to the peak and to the technical difficulties, first following the way that I went in 2001 up this, you know, technical ridge that sort of ended in this big spire dead end. But what we could see off in the distance where we wanted to get to, that there was a glacier down and to the left of us that wrapped around. And while we were at our little advanced base camp, there were big ibex herds grazing in those meadows up there, and we'd watch the herds go over this pass that we thought probably connected with this glacier. So we went back, and sure enough, we went over this little pass. We could see where the ibex had dropped down, and that allowed us to kind of wrap around all these technical difficulties and climb up to establish our Camp 1 at about 5,200 meters. Up to this point now, we had primarily non-technical climbing, but what we were faced now was the real difficulties of the peak, and the reason why, probably about 7 or 8 expeditions before us had failed in trying to climb the mountain. We had to get up this big rock band at the bottom, and trying to climb either side of that would expose us to a lot of overhead hazard from seracs. From our Camp 1, we went around and started looking at this wall and thought we might have to climb it directly. But for those of you who are familiar, the wall in the picture that you see here is about the size of the west face of the Hauser Towers. And when you get to the top of it, you've hardly started climbing the mountain. So if we had to do this much technical rock climbing low on the mountain, our chances of success would be small. We couldn't go to the left too far because you could see all the big seracs, these big ice cliffs that collapse and send tons of ice falling down the mountain that it's hazardous to be underneath those things. So I suggested, let's go over to the left and take a peek around the corner. And sure enough, we found this ice couloir, this steep ice climbing. And so we went over there early one evening because we have to climb at night here because it's too hot. During the day, it's east facing, southeast facing, and it would be too dangerous with ice falling down and rocks falling down during the day. So we started in the late afternoon, and you can see in the lower picture there, Graham or Chris starting up the ice pitches until we're climbing at night through most of the technical difficulties, and then into the early morning, topping out onto a ridge that then worked along the side of the ice rock edge there to get up to our Camp 2. Link Sar is an interesting mountain because it's like a multi-layered wedding cake where you have these steep walls separated by flat sections. So all of our camps were these big, flat, comfortable areas, but then in between them we had lots of difficult climbing. Above our Camp 2, we could pretty much see the route to the summit, kind of up the right-hand skyline, up the snow in the picture, and then following that ice ridgeline past that serac barrier, and then up to that rock band you can see up high on the right that would take us up to the higher reaches of the mountain. Unfortunately, on this attempt, we weren't acclimatized well enough, and our weather forecast had collapsed, telling us that like within 24 or 36 hours, the weather was going to change into a major storm, and we didn't think that was enough time to get up and down the mountain. And so we went down from there back to base camp, wait for better weather that never came. And so then we left the mountain in 2017 with our Camp 2 being our high point at just shy of 6,000 meters. Here Graham saying to Rasul, we're going to come back and try to finish this. In 2019, we found ourselves on the A320 jet flying from Islamabad to Skardu, past Nanga Parbat. But on this trip, we added a fourth team member, Mark Richey, who was a longtime climbing friend of mine, who I've climbed Laytok 2 with, made attempts on Laytok 1 with him, and then we made 2 attempts. We went on 2 expeditions in 2009 and 2011 to Sasir 2, to where we did a first ascent of that mountain in 2011 and won a Pulae d'Or for that. It was just great, for me really to have another person on the expedition my age, well into the 60s like me on the trip. Great having that kind of experience in addition to the young guys. Then our staff, again, Rasul, who I think this was his 12th or 13th expedition with me in Pakistan. his son-in-law Nadine, both of them had been with us in 2017. And that young 6 or 8 year old that was in the photo on my 2001 attempt, Fida Ali, came along with us to help as well in 2019. But obviously he was a grown man and able to be part of our staff. Our liaison officer was Captain Umair, who was instrumental in just helping us get through a lot of the bureaucratic issues, and then being in such a military sensitive area along the road of soldiers going up and down to the front with the Indian Army. There's a lot of activity, with the Army base that's below, where we had to, let them know that we had the necessary permits and answer their questions. And he was basically our intermediary with the military to make sure that that relationship went smoothly. What we discovered in 2019 when we got there, though, was that the winter season, the previous winter had a very, very heavy snowfall. And where we had our advanced base camp in 2017, right now, when we looked up onto those meadows were all covered in snow. And our ABC site was under a couple of meters of snow still. But we did have some time before we would move up there, because we changed our strategy in 2019. We felt it was really important for us to live up at the advanced base camp instead of down here where we had been basing out of in 2017. It's just too low. It was only at about 3,600 meters. It's very dusty and hot. And to climb all the way back up to 4,600 meters, where it would be better for us to be living, a lot healthier for us up there. We needed to build a more robust advanced base camp where we could live. And to be able to do that, we needed to carry more material up there, and we needed to hire some local porters to help us do that. But there are these rock slabs coming right up off the glacier that, after we get across the glacier, there's rock slabs that really you can't have porters going up technical rock like this with carrying big loads, because if they fell, they would, it would be a fatal fall for them to fall down these slabs all the way to the glacier. So we built this via ferrata of old fixed ropes up through these slabs that wandered between, places you could walk and places where you needed to have, ropes to assure your safety. And we gave all of them harnesses, and those guys carried loads up there. I think they made 3 or 4 trips to get up into the meadows where we've been in 2017, and I'd been in 2001. But then as we approached our advanced base camp, we got into all the snow. But we prevailed, and we got up to where we wanted to have our advanced base camp. And what we did was we just dug away all the snow down to the ground, and eventually set up our tents there. And the snow started to gradually melt away as the season progressed. And Nadim and Fida Ali moved up there to cook for us, and they had their own little mega mid that they were cooking under. And we had a little mess tent in our individual tents so we could sleep in, and it was a very comfortable, incredibly beautiful spot to spend time, trying to climb Link Sar. But what then happened was the hot weather in July triggered all the snow that was sitting on the mountain, from the winter to start sliding down in these massive avalanches. And we really couldn't climb until really conditions improved. And so we spent more time as the snow melted away, organizing our gear, and soon conditions stabilized. At night, we had just incredible views. We could actually see through binoculars, we could see the moons of Pluto from our ABC at So Clear. So we just followed the same route that we used in 2017, first climbing up to our Camp 1, and then, in the evening going up and climbing the same couloir, the same steep mixed climbing up to our Camp 2. The Seracs had changed a bit in a couple of years, but we were able to get up to almost 6,000 meters, which was our high point in 2017, and do a little bit of a reconnaissance above there. But our intention in 2019 was not, was to use this as an acclimatization trip. The Condas Valley is so deep, and the mountains all around are so technical that really getting up to 6,000 meters to acclimatize, to get your body ready to climb a 7,000 meter peak, the easiest way for us to do that was just to climb on Link Sar. So after we were done with this piece of work, we rappelled back down to our Camp 1 and walked back down to Advanced Base Camp to rest and wait for a good weather spell that we felt was long enough that we had a forecast for enough good weather to go back up and climb the peak. But unfortunately, a period of bad weather ensued after this, where we're just having to wait at our ABC, and Graham doing his yoga and playing chess with Mark, and hanging around ABC until after a couple of weeks we got a weather forecast that looked like it might be what we would need. We would have a couple of good days of good weather to get up high in the mountain, and it looked like we were going to get a storm, but it would be brief and not too much snow, and then after that it looked like good weather again. So we decided to take advantage of that and head up the mountain again, now with a lot less snow even than on our first trip up to 6,000 meters. Again, climbing at night to avoid the hot, dangerous conditions lower on the mountain. During the day, just some of the kind of technical climbing, in the lower sections getting up to Camp 2. We again, spent time at Camp 2 during the heat of the day, and then early the next morning, we went higher around this big Serac to get to our Camp 3. And here we knew, based on the weather forecast that we were getting from the United States, from Jim Woodmansey, who does custom forecasts for us, that we were going to get a storm here. So we hunkered down, found a really good spot where we were sheltered from any avalanches, and waited out the storm. We did a little bit of reconnaissance from there before the storm really came in heavy towards this rock band in the background that was going to be our next technical challenge. But we did have this storm settle in for about almost 2 days, and on the morning of the day that the storm was supposed to abate, we climbed up to the Bergschrund to where the technical climbing started again above Camp 3, but the storm didn't quit yet. So we dug this little snow cave to just get out of the stormy weather and occupy ourselves until finally it cleared off later in the morning. And we climbed through this technical section there up the ice gullies to the left of that kind of big rectangular block of granite. This is some of the best ice climbing on the route, actually. It was like maybe a waterfall ice, grade 4 waterfall ice climbing in the Canadian Rockies. And some nice mixed climbing as well. But then above that, what we thought would be easier climbing ended up being not technically that difficult, but quite committing, because we got into these long, 70-degree plus snow slopes where the snow was deep enough to where we couldn't get any anchors. We couldn't dig down through the snow to get the solid ice to place ice screws for belay anchors, nor could we really get to snow that it was even firm enough to place good pickets. So what we were doing was we were digging holes and creating anchors with deadmen made from tied off stuff sacks filled with snow, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a few minutes. So all this climbing here was quite insecure with these stuff sack snow anchors at the end of every pitch, but really nothing for protection, between the ends of you'd have to run it out 70-meter ropes to these stuffs that snow anchors. We late that day after leaving camp, our camp 3, we got up to our camp 4, which again, you know, was like one of these big flat areas between these layers of the Link Sar cake. You're taking from a ways away, you can see kind of in the lower right-hand corner of the photo where he had climbed up and through those fluted snow ridges up into this flat area where we put our camp 4. And here now we had just spectacular views of that part of the Karakoram looking east over towards Saltoro Kangri, which sits on the actual ground position line between India and Pakistan, where soldiers are faced off with each other, 12 months a year, 24/7, in kind of a modern day, World War I like trench warfare. Although there's no fighting anymore, they've had a ceasefire since 2004, but the incredible, difficult mountain conditions that these soldiers are faced with, being at these camps at such high elevation, they have a lot of casualties just from the environment. Above Camp 4 on our summit day, again, we got up onto the snow ridge with similar, kind of deep, unprotectable snow. There would be ribs coming off the snow ridge that we were going along that we'd have to climb up and over and around behind and up. And you can actually see the summit of Link Sar in the background that's not so far away. Looking way down now, probably like almost 10,000 feet from where we are now down onto the Kaveri Glacier, where you can actually, way in the background there on the other side of the glacier, you can see the road that went to our base camp and that the Pakistanis used to supply their troops along their line with India, much further up into the mountains. We got to the end of one of the pitches where we actually got some decent ice for anchors, and Chris, who had been leading, turned the lead over to Graham, who climbed up and then over onto this snow and headed up. In this photo, you can see his footsteps, but he got up to where you can see in the photo, he triggered this pretty thin slab avalanche that the snow slid over that dome, over our belay. The avalanche came over our heads, but it also knocked Graham off his feet, and he fell about 120 feet down and to the left in this photo. None of this we could see because we were over there at the belay, and I kind of rushed over to where I took this photo, looking behind me and yelling and trying to establish contact with Graham, and eventually I could hear him, miraculously yell that he was okay, because he had fallen down this gully and over a cliff and was just hanging from the ropes underneath an overhang in space, and he was able to climb back up the ropes to me, and we were both so frightened by what had happened. I mean, you can just see it in Graham's eyes here, that we were just hugging each other for about 5 minutes, just shaking. But eventually, the team, we kind of, what are we going to do? I was pretty freaked out. I was like, I just think we should go down. But the rest of the group, thought that, well, here we're just maybe about 300 feet, 200 or 300 feet from the summit. Let's just try to see if we can finish this. So we traversed across the slope in a different location that wasn't subject to the wind slab conditions that had caused Graham to be knocked off his feet. And we had conditions, pretty good snow conditions for a couple of rope lengths. But then just right near the summit, we got back into this deep, unconsolidated snow again, where it was difficult to make progress and almost impossible to find anchors. we got up onto the summit ridge, now maybe 50 or 75 feet from the summit, and there was really no anchors at all. Graham had dug this big hole for himself down in the ridge, and sort of he was the anchor, you know, just kind of just sitting down in there. And Chris was off digging this trough, trying to get to the top. Finally, he came back and said he tried as hard as he could, and you know, couldn't really go any further. While he was doing this, I dug a big hole, like a cave in the ice, in the snow, to try to get to some good ice for a good anchor that we could rappel from. Well, Mark went out and took the lead and did this just incredible job of working his way and digging and to eventually crawl up onto this tiny summit just as the sun was going down. And so Mark got up there, followed by Chris. Then I arrived next, followed by Graham, and then all four of us had a little celebration for a few minutes on the summit before we started a long descent with you know, difficult rappelling and down climbing because of the kind of snow we had. We spent soon after these photos were taken, it got dark, and we descended to our Camp 4 RS bivouac. We got there at about 2 in the morning, had a few hours of sleep, and then the next day we started rappelling down these big snow faces using these stuff sack anchors that I was telling you about. Through the ice, through the rock band, we had good ice anchors, and then we walked back down to the site of our Camp 3, but we just passed through. We didn't stay another night there. We had to do another rappel just before getting down to our Camp 2 site. And this kind of shows Mark making one of these stuff sack anchors where, you know, he fills the bag up with snow very tightly. He puts a girth hitch of 6mm cord around the snow bag. Then he sticks the snow bag down in a deep hole that we dig in the snow with a trench for the cord. And then we put snow on top of it and pack that down as tightly as we can. And then we jump test the cord to make sure to hold our weight. And then we'll build another one identical to it, and then equalize the load from both of them, and then rappel off of it. And sometimes in snow conditions that were quite soft, where it was hard to get the anchor to work properly, sometimes it might take us up to 2 hours to just build one of these anchors that we felt would be safe enough to rappel off. Down low now, below, we spent a little time waiting for the heat of the day to go by to start the descent from our Camp 2. We rappelled down the big granite wall that was above Camp 1 back to Camp 1, getting there at night again. And the next morning, packing everything from Camp 1 and carrying these massive loads of all that stuff back down to our advanced base camp, where Nadim and Fidali met us with you know, endless cups of juice and tea, and they made this big feast of us of French fries, fried chicken, you know, tuna salad and chapatis. And you know, we'd been on the mountain, we'd been away from advanced base camp, you know, climbing Link Sar and descending Link Sar and sitting out that storm. We had been on the mountain for 9 days, and with minimal rations. So having this feast when we came down was welcome, and we just so enjoyed sitting in the sun, just talking about our experience and what the partnership really meant to us, and it was just a really sublime moment. Ida and Nadim made us this nice celebratory cake, you know, for dinner, and it was just you know, a wonderful feeling to have done the first ascent of this mountain that so many people had tried. And for me, that was my third attempt on the mountain. I'd spent many months, you know, and finally have a success, you know, was such a great feeling. And I really just can't say enough about our team. You know, Graham and on the right and Chris on the left, you know, kind of our younger contingent, had done almost all of the leading, all the technical leading. They're younger and stronger and better technical climbers than Mark and I are at our age. And really without that kind of, youth and strength and skill on that kind of climbing, we never would have made it up this mountain. But they also wouldn't made it up to climb without Mark and me. Between the four of us, we had almost 130 years of combined climbing experience. And between Mark and myself, we contributed 100 years, to that almost 130 years of experience. And it was really, all that knowledge we'd had spending so much time in the high mountains, developing the strategy and just kind of how to do it and where to go, was equally important. And it just really meant a lot to me, and I think to all of us, to have this multi-generational team where, we all contributed in a way that if any one of the four of us wasn't there, we wouldn't have succeeded in decision making that we made to have the success and be able to get down safely was something that, to me, just almost really approached perfection. And really made me feel better than the summit itself. It's just kind of the way we work together. The summit is just a GPS point on the planet. Really, it was that teamwork and how we the process we used to get there that was really the most meaningful to me. And again, it was such a great team, and our Pakistani, Captain Umar, Rasul, Nadeem, and Ali were, incredibly important parts of our team that success. And here's just a picture of the mountain with our line of ascent. And for this climb, we actually received a Pulae d'Or this last summer. We were awarded that, and I wanted to just as I'm finishing here to read a little bit about what this award is about. And I'm reading from the Pulae d'Or Charter. It says, the purpose of the Pulae d'Or Awards is to raise awareness about the year's greatest ascents across the world. They aim to celebrate the taste for adventure, the bravery and sense of exploration that lie behind the art of climbing in the world's greatest mountain ranges. The Pulae d'Or draw their inspiration from mountaineering's rich history. They are a celebration of the sense of partnership and solidarity, of shared experiences, and reward individual or collective achievement. In modern mountain, questions of style and means of ascent take precedence over reaching the objective itself. It is no longer a matter of employing huge financial and technical resources such as bottled oxygen, fixed ropes, high altitude porters, so-called performance-enhancing substances, and large numbers of people to reach the top at all costs. The Pulae d'Or throw the spotlight on imaginative and innovative routes using a minimum amount of equipment and building on experience. This year's Pulae d'Or, which is an international award, they're kind of like the Oscars of climbing, were awarded in Poland. We weren't able to attend because of COVID, but one of our great heroes, Mick Fowler, was there from the UK and presented the award to us, in absentia, and which was a great honor, to all of us, but especially to Mark and me, who now each have 2 Pulae d'Ors, and to receive this kind of at the end of our climbing careers, doing this sort of thing was really special, and I think it was super cool for Graham and Chris to receive a Pulae at the beginning of their career and doing this kind of climbing, and I'm sure we're going to be seeing lots more of this kind of activity from Graham and Chris in the coming years. So with that, I'm going to conclude my part of the presentation, and I'm going to turn it over to, I think, to Amber, or no, to Graham for the Q&A. I'm going to unshare. I'm going to stop my screen share here.
All right. While Steve is unsharing, I just want to say, first of all, Steve, oh my gosh, your presentation, it made me smile. It made me shudder. That was really amazing. Thank you. My name is Amber. I am our development director. You're going to hear from me at the very end of the show, but I just want to do a quick update on how the Q&A is going to work. The chat box has been on fire during the presentation, which is awesome. Graham Zimmerman is going to take the mic here in a minute to take those questions and ask them to Steve. Feel free to keep firing away in the chat box, and we will get those questions over to Graham, and we're going to answer as many as we can over the next 20 minutes. So Graham, if you won't mind sharing your video, turning that on, turning your sound on, and let's get this going.
Hey everybody, I'm Graham Zimmerman, chiming in from Bend, Oregon, where I live with my wife and my dog, and it's a pleasure to be here with you and with publicly quiz Steve on some pretty great questions here. This is a lot of fun. Steve, are you back on at this
I'm here,
point?
I think.
Can you hear me?
Can you hear me?
Oh yeah, I got you. Hi. Hey Steve.
Hi.
I would like to start out, Steve, by congratulating you on, I guess I should congratulate you and your wife Ann on getting a haircut. You're looking rather dapper. I think the last time I saw you had quite the COVID do going on.
Yeah, well then I got the haircut, and then it's kind of starting to grow back out again.
Oh gosh.
Yeah. So I think I'm going to have to go in for another one.
Well, I think that's how that works.
Yeah.
Well, this is really fun to be here talking to you and asking questions. And we'll start with a question from Bogdan, which is, what's the consistency of alpine ice at these elevations at this time of year? And I think this is really interesting. Steve, you and I have spent a lot of time talking about ice climbing in the Karakoram. So why don't you share with us a little bit about your experience with finding water ice in the Karakoram?
Well, I mean, I'd say snow conditions in the Karakoram, they're a lot like Alaska, except that in Alaska you can actually get pretty good hard water ice like you would get in Canada, in the Canadian Rockies, on frozen waterfalls in the winter. In the Karakoram now, you don't really get that much waterfall ice. You get waterfall ice from freezing and thawing, and if you're low enough on the mountains to where you're getting thawing and then it's going to freeze again into ice, the weather's so warm and so hot in the summer now, especially in July when we're climbing, that what would be ice is just usually rotten crud. That's pretty scary and unstable. We had some of that on our second attempt above Camp 1, where it had gotten warmer and some of the mixed climbing was pretty slushy. And Chris did this amazing job leading those pitches on some climbing that I thought was pretty scary and insecure, that he did a really great job with getting us up through that. Again, on the upper part of the mountain, we just had a lot of this deep snow that maybe on a different year when there wasn't such a heavy winter snow, we would have had better snow, and it might have just been kind of more like neve, but again, it's hard to predict. I think in the Karakoram, you get just a little bit of everything.
Yeah, it strikes me that with the fact that there's not very much ice there, that it's really a place where modern mixed climbing shines. And this route was interesting to me because it was kind of this combination of modern mixed climbing and very like old school snow climbing. It kind of combined those two disciplines pretty amazingly. And I think that kind of leads us to Walt's question, which is, could Steve and Graham please comment on the value or challenges of such a widely disparate ages on a team? I don't know, do you want to start talking about that a little bit, Steve?
Well, I think that one of the, to be candid, I think, Graham, you might remember back in 2015 when we went on our first Pakistan trip together, you know, and you and Scott and I were together, and I said something like, okay, the first thing we're going to do is you guys are going to forget everything you learned from, you know, all of your heroes who said that you're going to climb these big mountains light and fast without carrying anything, and that you're just going to, you can do it in a single push, and then one, these mountains are bigger than Alaska, they're bigger than Patagonia, and there's a whole different scale, and so just those kinds of conversations about what I had learned over the years, and that if you are trying to climb as safely as you can, but if you're not really prepared for being on something that's at least 3 or 4 levels of magnitude bigger than anything else that you've been on before, that you're just going to get part way up and either run out of steam or run out of stuff. And so kind of the way that I've always liked to do it is to kind of try to do it as safely as you can, is how are you going to break this up into pieces in a way where you can avoid dangerous times of the day, and you really don't put yourself in a position where you get just sort of caught out without the things you need to survive. And I think that was really kind of the philosophy that I tried to impart on these younger guys, Graham and Chris, and then Graham and Scott, and then with Graham and Chris again in 2017. And by 2019, I think we were all pretty much on the same page, with it. But again, a lot of the strategy around doing things like how to establish the advanced base camp, this time with the porters, so that we'd be launching from a higher elevation. A lot of that kind of planning and strategy started with me, and because I've done so much of this, and I really think that like I said in the presentation, that Graham and Chris really took on the brunt of just leading a lot of the hard climbing and just getting us up the pitches.
No, I would absolutely agree. I mean, I think this climb was pretty interesting because it really required the strengths of all of the team members. I really, if we kind of break it down into kind of bifurcate the team into the young guys and the old guys, I don't think that the young guys could have made it up on our own because the strategy on the route was so complex. And Steve, you probably could have led all those pitches, but you would say that you couldn't. I
would be too slow. You're right. I probably could have led him, but I've been way too slow.
Okay. But I think that the top bit of climbing was like the last pitch was such an amazing kind of, it exemplified how everybody was needed, in that there was this like amazing moment where Chris like couldn't figure out how to get through this final horrendous snow. Mark but had been like leading all this amazing technical climbing. I think I was just sitting in a hole at the time. But then Steve is like digging into the mountain, like it's like deep understanding that we need to know how to get down once we get up, whether or not we make it to the top. And he's like thinking about the broader strategy of the climb and kind of has this broader vision for what needs to be done. And then Mark is getting at this upper like terrible snow climbing, utilizing the upward S digging pattern that he developed like in the 1980s in Peru to get to the top. And it's it's all these different techniques and all these different styles of strategy coming from all these like different pieces of experience from this team coming together to get us to the top and back down safely, which is pretty amazing. So a bunch of folks are asking about the avalanche up high on the peak. Oh, looks like we've got somebody sharing their screen here. But it's so a bunch of folks are asking about the avalanche up high, which isn't terribly surprising. And we can start here where Bernadette's asking about after the avalanche, you continued up. I would be interested to know what, if any, discussion took place to make that decision, and what were your recollections about that decision as to whether or not it was unanimous. I would say there's certainly a lot of discussion, and I'd say I think it was unanimous. But why don't we talk about that a little bit, Steve?
You know, I think this is one of those cases where everybody kind of has a different version of how they thought, you know, whether we should go up or down and who said what or how the decision was made. You know, my recollection of it was that I just said, I think we should get out of here. You know, this is like, I have had enough, you know, that this, you know, after watching you take that tumble, I was just like, oh my, yeah, this, and I felt like we had dodged this just incredible bullet, you know, because if you'd been hurt, trying to get you down the mountain with all those bad anchors, with the stuff sacks and all that, and trying to lower someone, it was just, I don't know how we could have done it. And all that was running through my head. And so, but then my recollection was that Mark and Chris, who were kind of removed from it a little bit over at the Pulae, kind of were like, well, it's okay with you guys over there. We'd like to keep going. And then you were just said, well, okay, well, I'm a little too psychologically battered here to keep leading. If somebody wants, you know, Chris, if you want to keep leading, I'll go along. And then I kind of said, okay. And that's kind of how it evolved, in my recollection.
That sounds about right to me. I feel like I kind of said like, okay, well, I'm pretty cooked, but I'm not hurt. So if we can keep going up, let's do it, because you're not convincing me to climb all the way back up here.
But then as it typifies this team, you know, the other guys then wanting, you know, to give somebody else the credit other than themselves of sort of having the motivation to keep going. Then Chris and Mark say it was you that said, I want to keep going.
Well, they're sweeties.
So I'm not sure. But at the end, we all sort of agreed that, well, yeah, we're really close. Let's see if we can do this.
Totally. And let's see. So, and Jerry asked about the fall, what protection held. I'll just say that I had traversed out to the left, and the rope was slung over kind of a rib on the face. So I had kind of fallen down a separate couloir, and then thankfully Steve and the other guys were tied to a good ice screw anchor. So
your fall came onto the Pulae.
Yeah, totally. But let's move on and talk about that crappy snow and building anchors. 2 hour anchors. Andrea and Bowden are asking about why we use stuff sacks instead of pickets, or instead of bollards. And did we just carry a big pile of stuff sacks up there, planning to use them as anchors? Why don't you tell us a little bit about those shenanigans?
Well, I'll talk about the logistics of it. You can talk about the building of it, because I think you probably did more of the building, you and Mark. But we only brought 2 pickets for the climb, so we ran out of the pickets pretty quickly. But you could have used, if we'd had, I mean, I don't know how many of these snow rappels did we do? Probably 8 or 10.
Something like that. Yeah, I mean, it seems like hundreds, but
and each of those, took up one, so we used up the 2 pickets pretty fast, because each of the anchors was a double anchor. So let's say we did 10 of them, that's 20 things that you're going to leave behind, because each anchor takes 2. And so that was 18 stuff sacks, and I think we just went through, we had a few extras, but then, stuff sacks that you'd have for your jacket or your sleeping bag or things like that got used.
Yep, that's my recollection is that maybe we had a couple extras floating around, but I mean, anytime you're up on a climb, you have a whole bunch of stuff sacks, and we just kind of by the end of it, we were just had backpacks that were just stuffed full of sleeping bags and jackets and whatnot, and all our stuff sacks were gone. And I think that, you know, do you think, you know, thinking about surface area and things like that, you know, like carrying that many pickets is pretty well impossible. We had also cut down our pickets, so they were quite short, just because climbing technical routes with big pickets is really tricky. So I think that, you know, in terms of your kind of getting bang for your buck in terms of snow anchors, those stuff sacks work really, really well. And I think it's worth noting that the snow up there was like really, really poorly consolidated. It took, you know, a lot of time and effort to get those stuff sacks to stick in there. And there were a lot of instances where, you know, there'd be just one person down there digging away, burying these things, and would test it and it would fail, and you just have to keep digging deeper. It was pretty, it was honestly pretty miserable. It was just became one of those kind of practices of like, you have no choice but to get yourself a good anchor. There's nothing, you know, nothing else is acceptable. So you just keep putting in the time until you can make it happen.
And I think that well, one thing too is that bollards would never have worked in the snow. The snow is just too soft. The ropes would just pull through the bollard. That would have been impossible. You couldn't have built boulders. They wouldn't have worked. But to add to what Graham was saying is that it really took a lot of discipline, you know, from the team to actually take the time to build the anchors strong. You know, sometimes, you know, on the two stuff sack anchors, you know, you wouldn't get one of the anchors to work. You know, when you were jump testing it or your body weight, you know, testing it, it might fail. So you'd have to do it again and again until it didn't fail. And some of these anchors were so difficult that it might have taken 2 hours to actually get the whole thing set up, and to a point where you felt satisfied with it, you know, to where you would rappel off of it.
Totally. Let's see, kind of moving down into the questions here. You know, back talking about up high and elevation. Can we talk a little bit about food at elevation, and when do you know that you're acclimatized enough to continue technical climbing at over 6,000 meters? Yeah, that's so I think that what are we eating up there, and how do you know you're acclimatized at over 6,000 meters?
Well, I think that for climbing a 7,000 meter peak, in my experience, it feels to me like you have to go up and spend a couple of nights at 6,000 meters to acclimatize, then come down to rest before you really want to go up and then climb the 7,000 meter peak. I think that's you'll be pretty well acclimatized from doing that. I mean, I've seen people just kind of skip that whole step, but when you do that, you know, well, first of all, you need to be really strong just in the first place to even attempt that. And, you know, you have a much higher risk of getting sick. And maybe you've seen photos of people who've done that before, and they get done and their faces are full of edema because they actually really went to such high altitude without being acclimatized that, you know, your body will start retaining fluids, and that's why, you know, people can get sick at altitude from pulmonary and cerebral edema. You know, that's why they look like that. And that's sort of after you've acclimatized to the lower elevations, like we did at Advanced Base Camp or to Camp 1. You know, we went up and down there a few times. We went up to Camp 2 at almost 6,000 meters. That was our final acclimatization. You know pretty well if you're a fit person and you've done that, you're kind of pretty good to go. And if you've got some kind of health problems other than, you know, beyond that, they're probably going to show up by then. And as far as food goes, Graham, maybe I'll let you talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, I could talk about food and nutrition for the next hour, and I won't subject anybody to that. But I think that, you know, a lot of with both diet and acclimatization, there's a lot of it really comes down to experience. And when we look at, um, you know, Steve and the experience you bring to a trip like this and a team like this, and your knowledge behind how you handle altitude and how you've seen others handle altitude, and kind of knowing what to look for in terms of how people are responding and that kind of thing, it's really valuable. And I think that the same goes for food in many ways. You know, some people don't like to eat at altitude. A lot of people don't. And so a lot of kind of getting that equation right means getting the right, you know, macronutrients and things like that you need, but also having something that you're actually willing to eat. And if we look back at the success of like the 1953 Everest expedition, a lot of that came down to like all those guys having specifically designed meals that were like their favorite thing, so they would eat it up at altitude. And I feel like there's certainly some of that goes into these trips with us still, where it's like Steve's like, I would like my salami and crackers, and Mark gets all excited and goes and buys like the really nice salami, and then it's like everybody's really happy to eat a bunch of really good food up high on the mountain, because we're like eating these things that everybody's excited about. And that's, for me, has really made me kind of hedge away from things like like Santa Fe rice and beans mountain house, which I don't really like at low altitude. And so when you get up high, it just gets worse. So I think a lot of it is finding that balance between things you enjoy and things that will, you know, get you where you need to go. Okay, so we've got a few folks who are asking, Steve, as a 60 something, how have you modified your training to continue climbing?
Well, the first thing is that all of my training, my first rule is don't get injured. If I go out and overdo it, you know, on a particular day, and I come back and I'm limping, you know, because I pulled a muscle or I did something that's going to take me a week or two to recover from, and I'm going to miss all of that training, that's it's a victory. You know, if you just come back, you know, to the house and you did most of what you wanted to do, but you're not hurt. Injury prevention is number one. And the other thing, I mean, it's, you know, what is it, Graham? You know, like uphill athletes, you know, coaches say it's, you know, consistency, you know, gradualness, and what's the third thing?
The one I always hear from
modulation.
So, yeah.
You know, so it's kind of, you know, you got to be consistent, and if you're consistent, that means you can be spending 80% of your time just building a huge foundation for a mountain like this of cardio fitness, you know, where you're at, you know, low heart rate, you know, and you can modulate that with, you know, some days of you know, interval training where you can, you know, really develop some strength. And you know, so you know, again, you could talk about this more than I could, really, even Graham. You know, the science of training for this has improved so much, you know, for alpinists compared to when I was, you know, like your age, you know, Graham. I mean, to be honest, you know, when I was like in my 30s, there were climbing friends who'd said, "Oh yeah, let's go out and get completely drunk," you know, because we'll all have hangovers when we're done, and that's going to be a good training for how you're going to feel at altitude, you know, feeling bad, you know. So, you know, we've come a long way.
Yeah, we're not doing that anymore.
No.
No. And I think, I mean, kind of to lean into your experience and something that we're seeing more and more come out of the data, you know, the science and the data from training and watching people's heart rates and how they respond to training at altitude and things like that. You know, we're kind of leaning into this idea that there's no such thing as a free lunch, and that really meaning in the sense that you have to really put in the time. You have to spend a lot of time training in lower heart rates, and it's interesting, Steve, I think for folks like Chris and I to look at your background, where you spent a lot of time going on long, kind of medium paced runs, spent hours and hours and hours with your heart rate in like zone, mid to upper zone 2. And we're really finding that that is a really big part of the kind of recipe for success. And I think you were doing it because it's what you knew how to do, and because it's what you had time to do, and that was kind of where your capabilities were. And it turns out in many ways, like you were doing it right. And I would hedge to guess that when you're in your 60s, that those similar kinds of workouts that are not super hard and super aggressive on your body are kind of exactly what you still want to be getting at.
Yeah, I mean, you don't get, that's how you not, those, that kind of long, moderate, putting in the time, not getting hurt. If you do that on a consistent basis, you can be pretty active, as an older athlete, and still perform at a pretty high level.
Clearly. All right, so we've got one last, two more. We've got two last questions here. One is, given your numerous trips to climb in Pakistan and your knowledge of the region, this individual loved your book. What are our best recommendations for adventurous, family-friendly treks or trekking peaks in the Karakoram?
Well, I really, I could talk about this for a long time, I would go up to something like the Charakusa Valley, beautiful village. The people are so welcoming. They have a really nice lodge there, and you can do treks up to the Charakusa Valley. You can also go up to the Masherton base camp from that side. I think, that's a couple of areas. Also I think some incredibly beautiful areas that I haven't spent so much time, but I've heard great things about over in Hunza, like going up to Karimabad and spending some time in Hunza. There's some great treks up the Shimshal Valley, and a lot of people ask about security in Pakistan as a place to go, and really I think that once you get into the mountains there, you're really completely safe. The people there, the mountain people, they're Shia Muslims. That most of the Muslims in Pakistan are Sunnis, and you can read my book, about that, why that, creates for, a really welcoming situation. But I guess the best way to explain it for me is that when we go on these expeditions, we're carrying massive amounts of cash. We'll go in and exchange maybe $10,000 worth of cash, which in their economy is a huge amount of money, into rupees, because we have to pay our porters, we have to pay our jeeps, and it's all cash economy. And so when we show up, everybody there knows that you've got all this cash. We've never been robbed. We've never had anybody really come even close to threatening us in any way, even though they know that we have all this money. I think if you've got, you're working with a reputable adventure tour company and you do a little research, I'm certainly willing, if people have specific questions about places to go, get in touch with me. I'll try to answer your questions.
Yeah, I have also never been up to the Hunza, but that area sounds amazing. And the other thing to dig into up there beyond the amazing sights is the history. There's Peter Hopkirk's book, The Great Game, which discusses a lot of what goes on in that space, which is a book that Steve turned me on to. It's like the history in these areas is fascinating, and there's so much cool stuff to dig into. I will echo Steve in saying that I have never felt threatened in Pakistan, and that was not my expectation.
And the other thing is that not very many people go there, so it's not crowded. If you go to Nepal now, in the height of the trekking season, it's gonna, especially in popular treks like Annapurna Circuit or the Everest Base Camp, those, there's just hundreds and hundreds of people, and it's very westernized now. I would say that trekking in in the Karakoram now would be similar to trekking in Nepal in the 1960s.
All right, so we've got one last question from Kate, and you're going to like this one, which is, Rasul is one of my favorite characters from Steve's book, and I'd love to hear more about how he is doing now.
Well, you know, the big thing that's going on with all of our friends over there right now is COVID, because, you know, their health system, you know, if people over there get really sick with in this pandemic, their healthcare system is so weak to begin with that it would have, you know, catastrophic consequences, you know. So they've taken it really seriously. So a village like Hushe, where Rasul lives, is at the end of it's a dead end road, you know. And what they did when COVID broke out in the spring is they just closed the road, and they wouldn't let anyone in unless they did a strict quarantine. And so they've done a pretty good job, and all the old you know, wise elders in the villages there where they've done that, you know, they haven't gotten sick, but it has had a big economic impact on them. So we've been trying to raise some money to send to them, because they have had no, they rely for a certain percentage of their income now on a tourist-based economy that didn't happen this last summer. And I'm really hoping that things improve, and that you know, people will be able to travel next summer, because if they have two seasons in a row without any tourism, I think economically they're going to you know, suffer even more. So they're all doing well. I probably communicate with Rasul about once every other month and get updates on, and they're all doing fine. But they are, you know, like a lot of people in the United States right now, you know, they're hurting economically.
Yeah, it's really interesting because, you know, when I thought about going to the Karakoram when I was a kid, I always just thought about the mountains. And Steve, thanks to you, you know, I have these dear friends there because I've been able to lean into these relationships, like Rasul, who you've known since the early '80s, and you know, he and his family are now some of my dear friends. And when I look at going back, like I'm planning an expedition for next year, and still trying to coerce you to come along. But you know, part of the reason to go back is to see Rasul, to support those guys, and make sure that they're doing okay. But I will wrap up by saying that I got a video from them over WhatsApp a couple of days ago, and it was everybody in the village dancing, and they were having, I think they had like blocked the road, and they were all out having a break. It was awesome.
Well, you have to send me that.
I will. Well, I think that is our last question, and with that, I think we're wrapping up. Amber, are you going to hop on, or should I go ahead and sign us out?
I'm gonna hop on. Thank you, Graham.
Great.
Yeah.
So thank you, Steve. Thank you, Graham. That was a really great treat to watch. We appreciate both of you so much. And to everyone who is still in the audience with us right now, thank you very much for being here and for supporting Steve and for Mountaineers Books. If you didn't already know, Mountaineers Books is celebrating their 60th anniversary this year. What started as a community pulling together to share their climbing knowledge in the first edition of Freedom of the Hills, it spawned into 6 decades and over 700 titles that inspire people around the world to pursue their most adventurous dreams. And perhaps even more inspiring, those donor-supported books, partnerships, and impact campaigns, they have helped to protect millions of acres of threatened habitat, including public lands that Mountaineers members recreate on every single day of the year. So thank you very much to Mountaineers Books as well. In celebration of their 60th, we invite you to consider making a $60 gift to Mountaineers in honor of a person, place, or book that has impacted your life. And Steve, if there's a link for how we can support Rasul and those in his village, we'd be happy to send that out in the email that's going out tomorrow, and everybody gets a link to this video to watch again if they'd like to. And with that, we'd love to invite everybody. You can turn your videos back on. Our sound is still off, but Steve would love the opportunity to wave to the folks he knows in the audience and say hello. And we're going to cut out in just a couple of minutes. Thanks.
Wonderful. Thanks. Thanks, Amber. And hi, there's Vic and Anita and then my friend Peter Masadaro, who's my best friend next door growing up. And sorry, we're still doing these Zoom calls, with and Jeff and some friends from high school I can see, on the that are here tonight and a bunch of my friends from when I was working downtown Seattle, we had kind of lunchtime running group, a bunch of folks, Gary Duvall and Jerry Bosch. Thanks you guys for joining us tonight. And it's just it's been a real fun opportunity to really share some stories with everybody. Thanks so much for being with us and supporting Mountaineers Books.
Thanks, Steve. We'll sign off now. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.